I'm super stoked to be here with you on stage right now. I mean, there's so much to talk about. We have a lofty title. We're going to cover a lot of interesting things here in this fireside, from account abstraction to beyond. So we'll see where that takes us. But maybe just we'll start with you. Give us a little bit of background, what got you into the space, and I think you've had quite the interesting journey that led to Save Now, and share some of that with the audience here.
Yeah, first of all, thank you to have me. So like the week has already been like great, and I'm really hyped about all the community excitement and the launches. But yeah, also happy to introduce me. So I'm Christoph. I'm a corporate and capital markets lawyer by training. I came into the ecosystem or into crypto in 2015 when one of my friends was investing into Ethereum, and he was explaining it to me, and I was not really understanding it. So I know the concept of money from a legal perspective, and then I was trying to like learn more about the concept of cryptocurrencies. It took me quite a while, but then also in 2016, the DAO incident happened. And this was like a topic I know from the inside out from a corporate law perspective. And then I was like fully convinced to go all into crypto, to also like study this kind of DAO thing, a new form of like collaboration. And yeah, I wrote my PhD about corporate law topics on the intersection of DAOs and law, and met the Gnosis folks a couple of months after their token sale in 2017. Became one of the earliest team members at Gnosis, helped to scale up the project to a couple of 100 people and different product lines. And over the last couple of years, Gnosis figured out that they were having so many product lines with like Safe, CowSwap, Zodiac, which were all playing together, but coming at a lot of administrative overhead. And they decided that the products who are having product market fit are supposed to spin off. And thereby I became like one of the 4 co-founders of Safe and leading the spin-off to what's now Safe.
And I just, for context, we've known each other for a while, and I think you're one of the most thoughtful people when it comes to thinking through DAOs, thinking through governance. So that's not the topic here today, but it's interesting because early on, that was a real sweet spot for Safe, right? It was kind of the infrastructure for DAOs. I remember before Safe existed natively on Celo, like I would get an email every day from a project, from someone saying, hey, when Safe on Celo? And so I think it's interesting because you've kind of seen also kind of DAOs, sort of, yeah, I guess mature and sort of different structures. But now I feel like it's shifted a little bit, where really when I look at Safe and maybe getting sort of to the first topic here on the title, account abstraction, right? There's kind of a new use case emerging, and so maybe tell us a little bit from your perspective at Safe, how is that kind of unfolding, and what are sort of some of the benefits that you see that can be achieved sort of with Safe as one possible infrastructure. Versus sort of the EOAs that we were used to.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, account abstraction is obviously right now one of the hottest topics beside like scaling issues and privacy topics. And so in a nutshell, it's just like overcoming the limitations of externally owned accounts and private keys, because like no one really wants to deal with like storing, managing, and recovering private keys. And now like we're just trying to leverage the benefits of smart accounts. And there's also like a lot of confusion when it comes to Safe. So also like Safe is and has always been account abstraction. And also like there's also a misconception that Safe is a multi-sig, because Safe is just like a modular smart account, and a multi-sig is one of the use cases of account abstraction. And so I think there are like many more use cases. For instance, like allow lists, recovery modules, insurance, transaction simulations. Because from my perspective, one of the most harmful sentences in our industry is be your own bank. Because like I know a lot of people like who are sitting there in front of their laptop, start sweating before actually initiating a transaction, because they know that like banks are doing like risk management, transaction monitoring, and I think we really appreciate every kind of like use case of account abstraction which makes self-custody less scary.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, I mean, for many people, it's it's kind of a scary experience to use a bank, you know, be a bank, right? That adds to it. And yeah, so I mean, when you look at how people are using Safe today, what are some of the kind of most interesting use cases you're seeing around that?
I think like the more interesting use cases are right now going into the direction of like non-financial use cases, like for many reasons, like also like from a regulatory perspective to showcase it's not all about like creating a new financial infrastructure, and also like just to enable mass adoption. So I'm not like a big fan of like buzzword bingo, but also like especially on the intersection of gaming, just because it's like a big market or like a big ecosystem, and a lot of people are also like understanding collectibles, and it's just easier to onboard people to this new form of technology.
So this is interesting, and this is, I think, good kind of way to transition for what I was going to ask you next. I mean, you mentioned gaming. I think a lot of people have come into Web3 through gaming. When you sort of, in your head, when you think about, you know, and you've been in the space for 7 years now, right? So as you look how far we've come and where we're going right now, kind of maybe transitioning more to sort of some of the other trends, what are sort of really the roadblocks that you see for bringing more, you know, real world adoption, more mass adoption, more regular people into the space?
Yeah, I think these are basically two, like some form of like, it needs to be like become less risky and easier to use. So basically like the two both principles, account abstraction is like building on top of. And so for instance, when it comes to like be less risky, like we need to do like better in terms of IT security. So there's like not a single month where we don't have any kind of like wallet hiccups. So like in the media every month there's a flaw, a hack, a drain or whatsoever. And this is just like scaring people. And so I think we can do better on the IT security side of things from a standardization perspective. And the second topic is obviously like the ease of use, just to try to reduce complexity without involving intermediaries too much, so that we can still like rely on a self-custodial basis. And so they're like a particular use case or thing I would love to see is like more traction on mobile. Because like right now our users are usually just like transferring bigger amounts of funds, and they basically said it's a habit. They are just feeling more secure on a web solution than on a mobile solution. But this is not the case with TradFi. Yeah. So I think this is like a particular like crypto thing where we need to educate people more, that they are also having like the risk appetite of moving significant funds on mobile. But I think like I would use the opportunity to like flip roles a bit and ask you about challenges of mobile adoption.
Yeah, actually, I thought the previous panel was really spot on. Silas, his comment about in the beginning, you know, really when thinking about their user base, of course, people that come to ECC should want to use Valora, but the much bigger opportunity, right, is people that are not at ECC. There's a whole world out there, and I think your point is well taken, right, especially when it comes to sort of high stakes for us kind of transactions, right? Many people are just more comfortable on desktop right now because the tooling on mobile has been lagging. But what about people that don't have the option, right, to switch, and that are, you know, a mobile phone is their only way to access this new digital economy? And I think that's where, yeah, I'm excited to see the work that's happened in the Celo ecosystem. You know, definitely Valora is a great example, but also many of the applications, right, that have really focused on thinking about, okay, someone who's maybe not, like, doesn't have any exposure to crypto or Web3, right, that's coming to an application, how can the look or feel of that application be, you know, I mean, as simple as WhatsApp, right, but still under the hood, give them the benefits of this new infrastructure, right? So we're not talking about a custodial wallet, right, that can have the look and feel of WhatsApp, but you know, a sort of a non-custodial wallet, right, that puts the user in control and gives them, you know, kind of access to this economy without sort of an intermediary. And I think that's really what it's all about, right? We have 6 billion or more mobile subscribers, and a lot of the tooling that's built is, I don't know how many people have desktop computers. I mean, maybe like a couple 100 million, I don't know. You know, we can massively expand our market as an industry, right, if we take more of a mobile first approach. So yeah, it's interesting that you pointed it out. So maybe going even beyond, right? So I think we can do a lot from a product perspective, but I know you also, I mean, given your background, you're looking at this also from a much more from a macro level. I know, we're pretty involved in some of the, discussions, educating regulators and sort of folks that need to be brought along to really get to mass adoption. What are some of the roadblocks or things you see there that can really help accelerate that mass adoption?
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of like also educational work necessary on like 2 levels. Like the one level is like on educating regulators, because like regulators are used to regulate intermediaries. So they are looking at it from an economic point of view, and the cheapest cost avoider is like an intermediary. And they just still try to still in their ways and categories how they think. And they just think there must be someone who's being more centralized than the rest of the group. And we are just trying to find this one and regulate it. And this is like, we are still like educating about like the benefits of decentralization. And if we are not having like specific principal agent conflicts, like we shouldn't regulate them. So there's always this kind of discussion that regulators are under the impression there should be no unregulated infrastructure. And this is something like we're working on for quite a while. And the second one, which is I think even more important, is like we need to increase like the image in terms of like winning in the court of public opinion. Because like if you're just like talking to like random people on the street, they still think like crypto is Wild West, money laundering, and it's not like meeting its like promises. And all of these kind of like stories are out there because like we are not doing like enough to fight it. So I think like we need to be more vocal about the things we are doing and why they are beneficial for society, and eventually like also coordinate better on the statements.
Yeah, I mean, big +1. I think it's, ECC week is always just a massive dose of, energy, I guess, for everybody who's building in the space, right? But what can we do to, I feel like this is a pretty critical point in this journey we're on as an industry, right? And we still have trouble of telling the story of the real world use cases, right? The headlines are still dominated by the hacks, the stuff that's going wrong, use cases that, are not the things that I think all of us here are passionate about. And I hope that sort of, now that the technology is maturing and some of the stuff we've talked about, Red's enabling that, right, enables us to actually have more of these use cases that we can share, and also that there's going to be more interest just by the size of the implementations, right? We're going from having, a year ago we were here and like, I look back some of the faces in the room, right? I mean, applications that were having real world impact at the time, right? Maybe have a few hundred, a few thousand users. This year it's, there's applications that have hundreds of thousands of like active users, right? And maybe next year it's millions, right? And it's starting to kind of grow at a pace where also from a public narrative, right? We no longer have to hide and be shy about actually telling those stories. And I hope that that's kind of, not just, the public narrative is not just, again, driven just by what is the price of Bitcoin, and like how is it changing, but people are starting to hear from their neighbors, right? And then obviously those stories kind of being amplified also in communities, just the power that this technology can have. I think we have maybe time for 1 or 2 questions. So for the audience here, think about if you have a question you wanna ask. Christoph, I think one last question for you, and I think this is, with Safe coming out of Gnosis, and I mean, you mentioned some of the other infrastructure, right? I mean, it's actually really amazing, and I think of a lot of these things as public goods that have come out of really, an early team. What is sort of your view on, especially for the builders in the room, how to think about as they're building their projects, as they're, we're so early that oftentimes when you build something, you realize, oh wow, there's 2, 3, 4 other things, right, similar to you guys that are missing, right? And so you start building them. Any advice for builders on how to prioritize what products to go after, how to, from a founder's perspective, like where to put priorities?
That's a tough one. But so what we are like spending like most of our time and it's like kind of obvious like on IT security, and we are like rather building like slower than other projects, so we're not jumping on every hype. So like there's a reason why we are currently like only so like being an infrastructure provider in the broader EVM ecosystem, because like at some point like you need to focus, and like you cannot just like jump from one hype to another. And so, but in our case, like the beauty is, and like we are really succeeding in it, that like we build everything open source. And this is how we can collaborate with other matter experts. So we consider Safe to be like a use case and user group agnostic middleware. And then there are other people who are building like extensions for like NFT collectors, retail use cases, institutional use cases, because we are really doubling down on like open source and on-chain transactions, and thereby like living up to the values of like crypto. And so I think like just being like as open and as pure as possible has been like a big success factor for us. And this is what I can highly recommend.
And I can attest to that. As we were just standing outside and about to come down, several people walked up to Christoph and were like, "Oh yeah, I plug into Safe, and it's been great for me to get users." So that's it's working. Congrats. All right, do we have any questions?
You mentioned allowless and some other use cases at the beginning for safes. I'd just be curious, like, what are some of your favorite use cases that you're seeing at the moment?
The favorite use case? So, like, it was great to see that we were also having, like, some, like, the Relief for India fund after the pandemic is built on top of a safe, like, Ukraine DAO is built on top of a safe, and what I like most about is also in terms of, like, for instance, also like NFT collectors and others, they can just set up a safe without knowing each other. They don't need to trust each other because it's just on-chain. And we have like hundreds of stories where people from all over the globe are just setting up like a multisig collectively and enabling something which they were not be able to do before. And this is something which really excites me.
Yeah, it's just before Marco. On Monday I had a slide here, which is my definition of Web3 is it's really a mass coordination tool for the world's hardest questions. And yeah, we've seen this with Ukraine DAO and other examples where really in a very short amount of time, people from all walks of life around the world can come together without knowing each other and use safe infrastructure, right, to coordinate. Bringing value very fast around sort of a common cause, and that in itself, even if that's the only thing that Web3 is good for, it's freaking powerful, right? Yeah, Marco.
Hey, I was just curious to learn a little bit more about how you guys decided to create and make available your token, and the rationale on the mechanisms or why you decided to go towards that strategy, because it was not a very common kind of strategy.
Yeah. So when we decided to spin out of Gnosis, 7% of the overall cryptocurrencies were stored on safes. It was back in the day like $135 billion US, and we realized that like it was basically like run by a for-profit company. And so it was like a critical backbone for the whole infrastructure. And we said like it's time to also like decentralize it, and like we need to DAOify, and actually like we'll have like some IT security standards where the tokenomics will plug in, and they will curate like which should be like a trusted, safe extension and which is not. Because like a lot of people would like to build safe extensions in terms of like plugins and hooks, but they are afraid of it because there are multi-billion dollars stored on it. And if one of those is getting hacked, like the whole brand will be like screwed. And so we now need to have like some governance mechanism where we can also meet the risk appetite of developers and say like, come in, you can pitch your extensions, we will run you through like your IT security process. And then like you also get some safe tokens you need to stake, stake as you go when you have skin in the game. And this is what we did. And then like our token is a ERC20 token and with the Open Zeppelin standard. And the transferability is paused because like we said, we don't want to have any kind of like distraction for like prices and other things. So we're just giving out the tokens to like our users and most important ecosystem partners. And from there, like we are deciding about like governance, token-wide OKRs and token utility, but just like that they have a say in the ecosystem. Yeah,
I think that's a super thoughtful approach. I mean, yeah, it's very clever what you guys did. Cool. I don't know. Maybe we have time for one more question. Yeah.
It's just a follow-up to that. Why couldn't that be done with like ETH in a smart contract? The use cases that you mentioned.
Pardon? Could you?
Yeah, around the token, like, could you explain like the advantages of like an ERC20 token, or I can't remember which standard, versus just locking ETH, like staking ETH directly in some sort of smart contract that institutes the governance you mentioned?
Yeah. So we just like did the token because also like it's just like being in the EVM ecosystem is just like the first step of our multi-chain strategy, and it was just easier also from like a scaling perspective to have something our own than having like external dependencies. So like right now we are on 50 networks like in the EVM ecosystem, but we on our roadmap, like we said, we want to go beyond by end of 2030. So we already like planned like quite far ahead and said like it would be rather complicated to sync everything with the Ethereum roadmap and rather being independent.
Awesome. Christoph, thanks so much for your time. I know you have to rush for another talk.